starting off this diverse session will be the keynote presentation by Elda Miramontes, and she will be talking about alongslope and across-slope channels formed or affected by bottom currents. So Elda, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Joris, for this wonderful introduction. I'm gonna try to start sharing. Can you see now my presentation?
I can see your web browser with the GoToWebinar launcher.
Okay.
I can see PowerPoint now, and you're in presenter mode.
No, it just takes longer. Okay.
Can you put it in full screen, Cassie? Or
it is on full screen, George. It's on full screen at the moment, so we are ready to go, I think.
Okay, 1 second, because I don't see it. Sorry. I will just close my camera. Now, okay, with the camera.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the introduction, and hello everybody, and thanks for coming to this presentation. So I'm Elda Miramontes. I'm assistant professor at the University of Bremen in Germany. And today I'm gonna talk about how channels can be formed in deep water environment, and particularly how bottom currents, that means the currents generated by the ocean circulation flowing near the seafloor, how they can affect and form channels. And this, the work I will present you is also in part of the work of some PhD students and master students that have been working with me, like for example, Kai-Chi Yu from the Chinese Academy of Science and Henriette Wilkens, a PhD student at the University of Bremen, among other colleagues. So when we think about channels in deep water environments, probably most of us start thinking about submarine channels. So channels that are being formed by turbidity currents flowing downslope, and they start eroding the seafloor and generating these huge turbidite systems. So these are major pathways of sediment transport in deep water environments. And of course, they play a major role, but they are not the only processes that generate channels in these environments. And with this presentation, I would like to show you some of other cases of channels that are being formed on continental margins and how they are being formed by or affected by bottom currents. So for that, I will use this fabulous sketch done by Javier Hernandez Molina, where we can see different sedimentary environments and processes that can affect continental slopes and how continental slopes can be modified in the morphology and in the deposition. So of course we can have the example of submarine channel formed by gravity-driven processes that can at the same time interact with bottom currents that are flowing along the slope. And when they are flowing along the slope, we usually call them also contour currents. So we can have the interaction of contour currents with the submarine channels or submarine canyons, and also with the turbidity currents themselves. Then we can, of course, have more pure contourite systems where mainly bottom currents modify sedimentation and erosion on the slope and can control strongly the morphology of the seafloor. So we can have the formation of some channels along the slope, and also often we can have the interaction with topography, such as seamounts or ridges. So I will show you 4 different groups of channels. First, we can have the interaction with turbidity currents, then we can have the interaction with topographic heights and slope breaks, but at the same time, bottom currents can also interact with depressions and form particular structures, and sometimes we find just in open slopes for some reasons that we will discuss later, channels. So let's start first with the interaction of turbidity currents and contour currents. And particularly, I would like to focus on the synchronous interaction this time. So the synchronous interaction occurs when both processes, the turbidity currents and the contour currents, are active at the same time, and this generates a combined flow. And this combined flow results in a particular channel geometry. And usually this geometry corresponds to an asymmetric channel-levee system where we have a more developed levee on one side and a less developed or even absent in some cases levee on the other side that usually corresponds to the upstream side of the contour current. So this is some examples of the northern Mozambique margin. And in the same area, there was in this paper by Furman et al. 2020, they also analyzed the present-day seafloor with ultra-high resolution bathymetry, and you can see also these asymmetric channels in this area, and they had also measurements in the same location that show that the current in this case flows towards the north, where the levee side is flatter and larger than the other side. So that corresponds on the seismic here on this side. So we have this contour current that is pushing, like in the sketch, part of the turbidity current to one side. So we have mainly the position on this side. And these systems typically migrate in the upstream direction of the contour current. So this, so that you can imagine a bit better the process, I'm going to show you also a video of an experiment that we did at the Eurotank with Joris. So in the upper part, you see a turbidity current without any contour current that is flowing downslope the channel here. We have a symmetric turbidity current, while in the lower part, there is an interaction with a contour current coming this direction. So you can see that the turbidity current is being pushed and deflected in the direction of the contour current, and at the same time is being blocked on the upstream side of the contour current. And you can see very well how the turbidity current is being blocked here and cannot move farther in this direction, and it's been completely transported by the contour current. So here the same, we have the overspill that is symmetric without the contour current, and when we add the contour current, we have this asymmetric overspill, and the contour current is advected by the contour, the turbidity current is advected by the contour current. And we had with this instrument here some measurements in the center part of the channel, and we could see here we have without contour current, and these are three different velocities of contour current, and we see that right above the channel height, so where the flow is already unconfined, the combined flow starts to be deflected to the side of the contour current. So here we show the direction against the height above the floor, and so we have a spiral structure of the flow that is being pushed. Here is downslope, and then it's being pushed to the side in the direction of the contour current until we reach a depth that is already high enough. It's just mainly the direction of the contour current. And the result of that is, again, an asymmetric deposition. So here we have the deposition before and after the experiment. So without the contour current, we have mainly a symmetric deposition with levees more or less the same on both sides. But when we keep having faster and faster contour currents, the asymmetry increases. So we have every time smaller levees upstream the contour current, and then the levees become larger downstream the contour current, because all the same is being pushed in this direction and it's being blocked in here and cannot be deposited. And also we have larger and more abundant bed forms in the levee that is located downstream of the contour current. So now let's move a bit more to the pure contouritic channels. So first we can have the channels that are being formed at the slope break or at topographic heights. So that means in environments where we have a strong change in the slope. And this very famous example here from publication of Javier Hernández Molina et al. 2016. From the Gulf of Cadiz, you can see some huge channels in this area that are being formed by the Mediterranean outflow water that comes out of the Mediterranean and then flows along the continental slope here in the Gulf of Cadiz. And when it interacts with some heights, like for example the Guadalquivir bank here, there are some channels that are being formed. And in these channels, usually we can find erosional surfaces and also very coarse material in the channel floor. So very erosive environments. When we have a look at the profile of the Guadalquivir channel, we can see here the topographic high, where along this topographic high, because of the change in the slope, there is an acceleration of the current, so there is an increase of the velocity along these flanks, and that's why we have the formation here of more localized erosional channel, and you can see the truncations on the deposits that are next to it. And this is a typical example of a contourite channel, and the difference with a moat will be that in a moat we also have accumulation here, so the drift is not completely truncated as in the case of a contourite channel. Here another example from the northern Argentine margin. So in this case, for example, we have more like a drift with a moat in this side, but towards the north, the channel becomes more erosive, and we have here again a contourite channel that is similar more or less to the case of Cadiz, where we are in the middle of the slope. So here there is a slope, and then at the foot of the slope there is again a strong erosion, and here we are on a relatively flat contourite terrace. And in this change of the slope is where we have the localized erosion, and we know that also currents are stronger along this flank. And you can see also in the seismic that we have truncations on the deposit, on the drift, and also on the channel floor. So we don't have any major deposition here, so the whole channel is completely truncated, and also on the flank of the slope we have here a huge erosion. So when bottom currents interact with topographic highs and slope breaks, they are accelerated, and that's why they also form these alongslope contourite channels. But bottom currents can also be affected by depressions. So when bottom currents interact with a depression, there is going to be also a local change in the hydrodynamics that is itself going to affect again sedimentation. And these depressions can be, for example, pockmarks, but it can be also any kind of depression. And typically when we have a depression such as pockmarks formed by fluid escape, and they interact with the bottom currents, these depressions, when they are round, they tend to be elongated with time in the direction of the bottom currents. But in some cases, when these pockmarks are aligned as pockmark trains, and we have relatively constant bottom currents that can erode these depressions over longer periods of time, they can finally, with time, form channels. And here you have also some examples from the South China Sea. And you can see some of the pockmarks that are elongated and others that have been already joined together and form a channel. And in this case here, we have the topographic profiles that go along the channel axis. So the upper one here, the A, goes through a more mature channel where we see already this is smoother and the channel floor is already a bit flatter, but we still see somehow a bit the relics of the previous pockmarks, so the heights that were separating each one of the pockmarks. And then another case here where it's a bit less mature, and we see still very clearly the heights that are located in between the pockmarks. So the idea behind this that we propose is that we have first isolated pockmark trains that can be already aligned for multiple reasons, because they are related to a fault or because they are related to a mass transport deposit that is below it. It's a common feature actually to have them aligned. And then when they interact with bottom currents, with time they start getting eroded and until they form a channel. And we did some numerical modeling to try to prove this hypothesis. And here you have some of the results. So in the upper part, you see here the pockmark trends. In this case, we have 3 pockmarks. And you see here the velocity that is in the last layer, so the bottom current, in this case, the horizontal velocity that goes in this direction. And then in the lower one, you see the vertical velocity. So you can see that inside the pockmarks, we have the weakest bottom currents, while the highest bottom currents, they are located in between the pockmarks, aligned with the pockmarks. And particularly in the part that in the flank that is located downstream of the pockmark. So here we also have some higher velocities, but it's behind the pockmark where it is even higher. And you can see here the same in the last one. And also we observe particular movements in the vertical velocity. So in the part that is upstream of the bottom current, we see that there is a downwelling and then we have an upwelling on the other side. So this vertical velocity could also contribute to the sediment transport in this case. And we did this numerical model with DEL3D. So with this model, we can also simulate the morphodynamic evolution over time. And here you have the results of different numerical experiments. First, with the pockmarks that are close together. And in color, you see the change in water depth. So the water depth at the end of the experiment. And here they are a bit more separated, 50 meters in between, and here they are even more separated. So you can see that we have a strong erosion along the axis in the direction of the bottom currents, and in all the cases. And also the strongest erosion is located in between and after the last pockmark. And when we have a look at the cross section of the last one, you can see here that we also have a bit of erosion on the upstream part, but mainly the strongest one is in the downstream part. And this at the end forms a channel in the with the orientation of the bottom currents. But we still preserve part of the initial topography that we had in between the pockmarks, which is something that fits very well with our observations from real systems, modern systems at the seafloor. And we checked also what's the distance that is necessary to form such channels. And this distance has to be less than 6 times the diameter of the pockmarks. So if the pockmarks are separated with a distance that is more than 6 times their diameter, then they don't form a channel anymore, but at the end the result will be isolated, elongated pockmarks. But sometimes we can also find channels in environments that don't show any particular change in the general topography. And there are other processes that seem to form them. So they are located in open slopes, so to say. And here you have an example from the Namibian margin. This is located in the upper slope, relatively close already to the shelf edge. And you can see that this channel is very straight, very longitudinal, and the width is between 200 meters and 1.2 kilometers in width. And the channel is very erosive on this side, especially in the western part. And you can see here a parasol profile that crosses the channel with this huge escarpment that is the result of the erosion, and then generates this steep slope on this side, and we have a bit of a drift deposition on the other side. But there is also erosion behind this escarpment in a bit of farther downslope. And this truncated seafloor here corresponds to this area on the map. And you can see that it's a bit irregular, and there are many like small highs, circular dots. And this corresponds actually to cold water coral mounts. So we have a surface that is being eroded also in this area, and that is being strongly colonized by cold water currents. So in this zone, we have a strong evidence of internal solitary waves. This satellite image was obtained at the same period of time as the geophysical data. And you can see that there are very large trains of internal solitary waves that are reaching our study area. Here you have in red the approximate location of the channel that we study. And we have these huge trains that are moving, flowing in the direction of the continent. And then we also see some smaller ones that are already on the shelf. And we have also evidence of these internal waves from parasound imaging of the water column. Here we have the escarpment with the channel, and we see some internal waves that are approaching the area, and also the other smaller internal waves that are continuing to move towards the shelf. And here you can see in the zone where we have the cold water coral mounds and the erosion that we also have some particular higher amplitudes and kind of mixed layers in this area. And above the channel, we have some jumps on the reflectors that seem to indicate that maybe there is here a hydraulic jump and that internal waves might be breaking at this escarpment. So this is still a work in progress. We still don't completely understand how internal waves may be forming this channel, or if this channel is actually the consequence of breaking internal waves. So hopefully in the coming months we will have a better idea. But it would be great to also find other places where such processes are occurring to compare. So we also had studied another similar example, also in a similar environment. That is the upper continental slope of the Mozambique margin in front offshore the Zambezi Delta. And we are also at similar water depth, at around 150, 200 meters water depth. And in here you can see that the channel is also very straight and continuous. But in this case, we don't have a large escarpment, but it's just a small channel erosion in a more or less continuous seafloor. And this corresponds to a contourite terrace that is a relatively flat surface dominated by sandy deposits at present. Below, we mainly have glacial muddy sediments, because in this area we are in front of the Zambezi Delta. So during sea level low stands, the delta is located very close to the study area and is delivering directly a lot of sediment. But during sea level high stands, the shelf is relatively large, and most of the sediments are carried away northward. So we have less sediment supply, and that's why these erosive features can appear. And we see a similar object that is has been dated to the last interglacial. So also during the last high sea level stand, we had again the formation of another of these channels. And here we also have evidence of internal waves from the water column, from the seismic of the water column. So you see here a profile also showing the contourite terrace, the plaster drift, and this channel on the upper part. And here you see it in the chirp profile, how the channel truncates completely the reflections. And we also have a surface that is erosional surface on the seafloor with composed mainly of sandy deposits. And in the water column, we see farther offshore the reflections that are quite continuous, and so we have a normal stratification of the water column. But when we reach the seafloor, we start seeing that the reflections are more discontinuous, kind of transparent in here and mounded. And also we see some wavy pycnoclines, so wavy reflections above our channel. So this might indicate that we have internal waves that are breaking and interacting with the slope in this area. We also had another profile where we had at the same time profile of temperature measurements, and we could see that these high amplitude reflections correspond to zones where the temperature gradient is the highest. So we have a pycnocline here. And at this level, we could also see that when it interacts with the seafloor, we found these wavy reflections that correspond to boluses. And these are formed when internal waves break on the slope, and then these small boluses start propagating and keep moving farther onshore. So all this interaction could strongly affect sedimentation on the area, resuspend sediments, and enhance erosion in some locations. Then the question is why, particularly at this location, we have such a linear channel. So we also have some numerical modeling of barotropic currents in the area. And here you have the results, and particularly after high tide, barotropic currents mainly flow offshore. And here you have the location of the channel. And the idea is that when we have the internal waves that are propagating towards the slope, when they reach a zone close to the slope, the depth below the pycnocline is already lower than above the pycnocline, so the internal wave becomes an elevation wave, and that makes that in this near the seafloor, the currents flow towards the continent, so onshore. But we have in this case also the barotropic currents that are flowing in the opposite direction. So it might happen that these barotropic currents are stopping the internal waves at this location, and this creates also a hydraulic jump, and it makes that there is more shear stress concentrated in a location for a relatively longer period of time that could generate this localized erosion. And because we have internal waves that are kind of long and with a similar propagation, and then the currents that are also relatively parallel, the barotropic currents all along the margin, that could explain why this channel is always at the same depth and so rectilinear. But well, this is still also just a hypothesis. Let's say when there will be necessary to have more measurements and numerical modeling to really prove how internal waves could generate these channels. So to conclude, I would like to make a summary of the different aspects that I just showed you. So first, we can have contour currents, bottom currents that interact with turbidity currents flowing downslope, and they generate a combined flow that has a spiral structure and results in the formation of asymmetric channel-levee systems. Then in zones where we have topographic highs or slope breaks, we can have an acceleration of the bottom currents along these slopes that can result in the formation of a channel that generates truncations on both sides and even also on the channel floor. Well, depressions can also change locally the flow properties near the seafloor, and they can generate also enhanced currents in the flanks in the direction of the bottom currents that could result, when they are aligned, these depressions, in the formation of a channel. And in open slopes, sometimes we find, particularly in upper slopes, channels that are very rectilinear and seem not to be related to any particular topographic element. And we suggest that they might be related to internal waves. Then how exactly this process is occurring is still not so clear. For the case of the Mozambique channel, we suggested the idea of the arrested internal waves by barotropic tidal currents, but there can be also other processes affecting these channels. So that's it. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Elda, for this very comprehensive overview of different channels way beyond turbidity current channels. So for the audience, you can put your questions in the question box, and then the presenters can answer them after their presentation or later. If you are a presenter, then you are an organizer in this meeting, and then the question box won't work for you. You could also send them to me via the chat or to the speaker. So is there a question for Elda? While we wait for those coming in, I can start with a question. In the case of the pockmarks, I can imagine that the pockmarks might originally not be aligned with the prevailing contour current direction. So does the channel then form at an oblique angle to the contour current direction, or does that not occur? So do the pockmarks have to align with the contour current orientation or not?
Yeah, I think that if they are not aligned, then you will have a pockmark train that will be formed by elongated pockmarks in the direction of the currents, but they wouldn't erode in.
So they form a kind of an echelon array, but they will never connect in the channel. Yeah, okay.
But then maybe because contour currents tend to follow the slope, maybe we have also more often this kind of pockmark trains that follow the slope as well.
I see.
So it's easier to follow.
And another question about these open slope channels that are very long and very straight. Do you also think, or do you have data that shows that there's a flow following those channels, or not? So is there is the channel confining a flow that flows along that channel?
Yeah, so unfortunately we don't have very good quality data in these both cases, because in the case of Mozambique, they were mainly aiming at studying pockmarks, so they stopped the ADCP because it was affecting a bit the quality of the water column acquisition. And also in the case of the Namibia, the quality is not great of the ADCP data, so we cannot tell for sure, but I'm quite sure there is a flow in this direction because we can see in the Namibia case that we have a drift right next to it. Okay. So maybe it's a bit different, the case of Namibia with the case of Mozambique, because in Mozambique we have truncations on both sides, although we do see still as a little, like a mini mound next to it. So I can imagine that maybe it's both. If it is true that internal waves form them, maybe it's the internal wave really generating the erosion, and then once you have a hole, you start maybe focusing there the contour currents.
Yeah, so there's a sequential evolution in the,
Yeah,
very interesting.
We need to measure.
So we have another question coming in from the audience. We have time for just time for that, about the pockmark or initiation as well, or pockmark related channels. So the question is, does the pockmark initiation have a relation to the channel generation?
I don't think so, at least for the case of the South China Sea that we studied. This area is completely full of pockmarks, and there are a lot of gas hydrates in the area, so there are even larger pockmarks, and these larger pockmarks, they are not affected by bottom currents. It's mainly the smaller ones. But it seems that from the origin of these pockmarks, they started, most of them, to start getting elongated. But it's a bit hard to tell. But it's for sure they are related to fluid escape. Then how in time they exactly work together is a bit hard to tell.
Okay, so more work to be done. Thank you very much, Elda. There's some other questions coming in the question box and in the chat for you, which you can address there. So okay, we will.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.